Hey, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at EmbellishPod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today, I have Kenny Coleman joining me from Bourbon Pursuit, from the Pursuit podcast, from the Pursuit Spirit series, from a whole host of things. And he's kind of one of the grandfathers of whiskey podcasting. And we have a really, really fun conversation about podcasting, about whiskey, about building brands, and a whole host of other things. And I hope you guys enjoy today's episode. This morning, this afternoon, this evening, whenever you happen to be consuming this podcast, I have Kenny Coleman joining me from Pursuit Spirits, from one of the biggest whiskey podcasts that exist, a whole host of things. So Kenny, let's pretend for 1 minute that anybody who listens to this podcast doesn't know who you are, and kind of give me the elevator speech on who you are.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you so much, John, for having me on here. I love being able to be on the other side of the microphone, and I'm always the one asking the questions, not the one
Mhm.
getting to answer them. And so it's always fun to be able to do this. So I'm Kenny. I'm 1/3 of Bourbon Pursuit. We had started back in 2015. It was me and my other business partner, Ryan Cecil, who a lot of people might know as well. And then later on, should I say a couple years later, we brought Fred Minnick as another person to come on the show that really helped just bring a lot of validity to what we were doing. He is able to bring years, and not even years, I'm talking decades worth of experience and knowledge, and makes us probably one of the leading places to go to when it comes to bourbon education, just because we've got an all-star on our team when it comes to that. And then in 2018, we had this bright idea to go and start our own whiskey brand. It was fun. We did some few cash drink one-off single barrels. We took it a little bit more seriously with the start of COVID in 2020. And then now here we are, gosh, 5 years later, $9 million in debt, with big aspirations and multiple product lines, and distributed in multiple states, and have, caviar dreams, but it's on a Miller Lite can right now. So we'll kind of see what happens.
You could always pick up a High Life, right? So you can be at least the champagne of beers to go with your
Yes.
caviar. And it's funny you mentioned Fred. I was interviewing Peggy No Stevens last week, and she mentioned him and how long he's kind of been in the business. It does kind of give you a little bit of notoriety, but there's no shortage of content that you and Ryan have produced since the beginning. But maybe kind of going back in time a little bit, you and Ryan have really, really different backgrounds. How does Ryan and Kenny become the beginnings of Bourbon Pursuit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we got together. It's not because of us. We weren't ever friends. We didn't really
Mhm.
know each other. It's because of our wives. That was the mutual connection. And I think most people that know us and heard this story for quite some time know that through our wives, Ryan used to throw a pretty elaborate derby party, and kind of apropos, even coming up this week, we've got a lot of derby stuff going on. But he would throw a huge derby party. Because here's the thing, is like, if you're local to Louisville,
Mhm.
yes, there's derby, there's celebrations, there's stuff like that. But a lot of locals don't actually go to the Oaks and Derby.
Mhm.
It's just, that's when everybody from out of town comes, and we know that if you're gonna go out Friday and Saturday night, you don't try to make reservations at the fancy restaurants. Those have been booked up for months. You
Mhm.
go to your local bars and stuff like that, and because people aren't just going to go for a smash burger when you're out
Mhm.
for Derby. So anyway, he used to throw derby parties because that's what a lot of locals do, and this is all pre-kids. I would go to it, and I used to bring very nice bottles to this, and he kinda took a notice into it and said that, I was very much into bourbon. The bug bit me probably around 2013 when I started
Mhm.
really getting into it, and not just, like, drinking bourbon, but actually buying a ton of it and buying, high-end stuff. I had been drinking bourbon for quite some time before that. So by just that mutual being there at the party, he kinda noticed that he had this idea of wanting to start a podcast, and he was gonna do it on lawn care. He didn't know if it was gonna have much runway, so his brother-in-law, who still works for Heaven Hill to this day, said, "Ryan, you're from Bardstown, you should probably do a podcast on bourbon.
Mhm.
And I came from a tech background, and that's what my bread and butter was for a very long time. I've worked at very large companies. For anybody that's wondering, I was there in the early, not early, but I was there in the good days of EMC. So if you're like a data storage person, finished part of my tech career over VMware,
Mhm.
wrapped up once Broadcom took over. So been in those technology sectors for quite some time, but always just been fascinated with technology. And that's why I like to say that, as a part of bringing, I called in my bio as like, I bring a disruptive
Mhm.
mindset to bourbon, because I always look at what happens in bourbon through a lens of technology, because we have this revered uh, old school mentality. It's always been done this way. Nothing's ever going to change. But the reality is that technology will absolutely disrupt and change anything. And all it's
Mhm.
going to take is one thing, that one pivotal moment where, Kodak is no longer Kodak. We can take down all these sort of lessons over time that this is what technology happens. It can disrupt any industry at any time. You just don't know when it's going to happen. So I anyway, back to technology. I know how to run a podcast. Well, at least I said I thought I did. I learned a lot through the process. Our
Mhm.
first 100 episodes are absolute garbage. So if you've never heard of me, never heard of Bourbon Pursuit, I would say start from the very newest ones and work your way
Mhm.
backwards. It will take you, if you listen to 5 to 8 episodes a day, it's going to take you around, I think, 7 to 8 months to get through
Mhm.
our entire catalog. So there's a lot of content there. But those first 100 episodes, I wouldn't say they're rocky. We were just kind of finding our groove.
Mhm.
But now, I mean, John, you're looking at me through the camera. We've got broadcast level equipment. We've
Mhm.
made huge investments into the technology, the post production process. And now I really look at, and this is one thing I did a long time ago, especially before we brought Fred on. And after those first 100 episodes, I put a big emphasis on knowing that the audio is our product, and we have to have a really good product if people are going to want to pay attention to it. And so over time, we've made a lot of investment just making sure that we can create the best possible show for people. But it's not just the content; it's truly the quality of the audio, and soon to be the video coming here in the next couple months.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And to kind of put it in perspective, right? If you're hopping into the podcasting world in 2015, there was a lot of people doing podcasts, but they weren't necessarily at the popularity level they are now. And you can get by with bad video from 2015 to probably about 2020, maybe 2023. But bad audio, you're going to be out there, right? And I think everybody says their first 100 episodes or so is probably some of their worst. You're sort of finding your footing. But I like the concept of looking at bourbon through a technological lens, because you're exactly right. And even if we take it back to sort of its birthplace, distillation was a methodology to preserve crops over a long period of time, right? It is ancient technology, but as the United States industrialized, so did bourbon, right? So it kind of follows the industrialization, which is going to be technology disrupting how bourbon was made, because it went from an on-farm product to an off-farm product where you're shipping your grain to someone else, they're distilling it, maybe you get it back, or maybe you sell it in a marketplace. And then there's conglomeration and bottling lines and mechanization, and then getting it to kind of a certain level. And now we're looking at places like Whiskey House, who are using AI to kind of run a whole operation with maybe a half the staff, a third the staff. So technology lens, I'm with you. I work in software day to day as a product manager, so we all kind of lean in that direction. But if I go backwards a little bit, right? You started in 2015, you started your brand 2018, 2019. I'd love to hear about sort of the specific moment when you thought, hey, we have full-time jobs. We also have this really busy podcast slash website thing. There's some kids involved. There's some marriages. I'd like to invite more stress into my life. Like what brings that decision about?
I don't know if it was like a decision. It just kind of almost felt like a natural, and that I always use this as a kind of part of the story, because people assume that you start a podcast on bourbon, you're eventually going to come out with your own bourbon. That was never in the playbook.
Mhm.
It was never part of what was like a 10-year plan. even though it seems like a natural evolution of what it would be, uh, it was one thing that led to another where one door opens and you're going, well, we might as well see what we're going to have here, and if it makes sense to us, if it uh, financially, whether it's reasonable, whether it's not, because the podcast, we have it really running like a well-oiled machine. I use
Mhm.
that phrase a lot because we know that we've got our 3 episodes we release per week. We have our recording schedule for it. Is it a lot? Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's comes down to knowing not that we can bank a lot of the content and we can get to it, and we have our production schedule, so it's easy to get to it. Knowing that we sort of box these things out, then we can go ahead and bring on other things. So when it and by the way, we're starting the brand, it was never to the point where it is today. It was picking out cash string single barrels. We were already doing that as a part of Bourbon Pursuit with our barrel picking club, going to Jim Beam and picking Knob Creek barrels, or going to Four Roses and picking barrels from there.
Mhm.
So traveling down to Memphis for a couple days to go and taste through 50 barrels, eat some ribs, sure, just seemed like a kind of fun little
Mhm.
getaway. And I was very fortunate with my tech career. I know that it's not like this for most people that have to go to an office or a regular job, and you know, obviously you're here too during a working day as well. Is that you get a lot of flexibility and freedom
Mhm.
in the technology side? Is that you can work at any time you want. So if I need to start working at from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., like I can do it. It just depends on, like, I know my work. I have to get it done
Mhm.
for my deliverables. It just doesn't matter what time I get it done at. So
Yeah.
having that flexibility to go and just go off on a whim and go do barrel picks and go do whatever, that's fine. Sure, I can miss a meeting every once in a while, but I just can't make a habit out of it.
Mhm.
And then Ryan, he owned his other businesses, so he had that uh, solo entrepreneurship sort of mentality anyway, so he could kind of just go off on a whim. But
Mhm.
that was sort of it was just kind of like one thing that led to the next. And when we started taking the United project a little more seriously, and that's what we had been doing Pursuit series, which were our Cath strength single
Mhm.
barrels, they're one-offs, fun stuff to do. We did about 20 or 30 of them. And that was our broker at the time, and he said, guys, you got to come out with a scalable product. This is fun, but this is not a real business. And
Mhm.
and so we said, well, we've got to test the waters with something. And that's how the United project was born, by being able to find different mash bills, different states, different barrel types, everything like that, and bringing together, create our own flavor profile.
Mhm.
We started that with 10 barrels, and we have up until I would say 3 months ago, 2 months ago, we finally started paying ourselves. So if you're looking to the trajectory of what it's like to start a whiskey company, just know that we started from 2018. We didn't pay
Mhm.
ourselves until 2025, and that's taken a massive pay cut coming from the technology side. So just kind of keep that in mind if you have any other dreams or aspirations. They say if you want to make $1 million, start off with 10 million.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the case for bourbon, for farming, for just about
For
everything.
about anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, we just kind of, we said, if we have 10 barrels and we can do 2,000 bottles, well, let's go ahead and start thinking long term, strategically. Let's start putting this in spreadsheets and figuring out, all right, if this is my new make cost, this is what my return is going to be at 4 to 6 years. If we did 5,000 cases, what could this look like? If we did 10,000, if we did 25,000, and so on. And then once we got to the point where we looked at them, we said, okay, 50,000 six packs. That is a manageable amount that we can do between just Ryan and I managing and owning the company. We can get by with just running on debt alone and interest
Mhm.
free loan, or interest payment only loans. Yeah, interest free loans. That'd be nice. Um, interest only loans
Mhm.
until we can start paying back the principal on it. And we had mapped this all out. We know that we
Mhm.
we had to buy enough whiskey to get us through these band-aid years of overpaying, at least hindsight in the market. But wish we would have
Mhm.
waited a little bit more, but we overpaid to get some barrels so that we would fill these gaps of 1, 2, 3, and 4-year-old whiskey,
Mhm.
while our new make was aging, where we can start really opening up our margins and really start paying ourselves. And so that's sort of we're at the like 85% mark right now of being
Mhm.
able to start turning over into a lot of stuff that we'd started putting down back in 2020 and 2021. So I'm really excited going into 2026 because that's really going to open the doors up, because right now we're running on the last bit of stocks that we had bought at
Mhm.
1 years old. And we've been sitting on them. And so it's great now that we can start putting into our new make products going into 2026. It's gonna really open up the business. But it was a very strategic way to look at it. Nothing was done haphazardly. Everything was done with intent. Everything was done with a lot of um, like, how much financial risk can we put into this? And we know that we can pay this back. And we made a conscious decision early on that we were going to do this all on debt. We weren't going to take on any investors.
Mhm.
We ended up taking a very small investor round late last year. Actually, it was Derby time last year is when we took our first small round of investors. That way we can sort of, and it wasn't just to, get money in the door because we're bleeding cash. Now we're bleeding cash, but that's because we're waiting to get the doors open downtown. We just knew
Mhm.
that we weren't going to have enough money to buy all the couches and the sinks and all this other kind of stuff for a construction project that's going to
Mhm.
cost us, 1.1 to $1.4 million. So we knew that we had to do something to get some money in the door early on to take care of these long-term investments that we really see for the brand.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of have this crisis as you're starting a brand of you either take on investors, you take on debt, and debt feels scarier, at least in the short term, because you're on the hook for that money as opposed to investors. You know, you're on the hook with a group of investors, but you kind of spread out the threat of, of failure or whatever. But doing it debt, you get to maintain control of the direction explicitly. It does make a ton of sense, and I hadn't really kind of thought about this. You framed out, take on some investors to help out with the depreciable assets that you're going to put in a physical location, as opposed to the appreciable assets of the barrels. Right, the barrels gain value over time, so having a debt against that's not necessarily as concerning as having a debt against a couch, a chair, a table, a bar setup. Those things immediately lose value the minute you put them in the building. So, kind of leverage that against angel investors. So it makes tons and tons of sense. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I've physically been to the not downtown location, got to do the bottle your own thing, and we can talk about that eventually. But you guys are working towards a spot in downtown Louisville, which seems to be becoming the urban bourbon capital of the world. Tell me about that move.
Yeah, and we are, as of the date of this recording, probably T minus 30, T minus 40 days from opening. I
Mhm.
walked through the building this morning. I typically have my daily disappointment where I drive downtown and I walk through it just to see what's going on. Happy to say that at least this morning, the entire place, or my first floor and the basement, were completely covered in drywall dust, which
Mhm.
means that the drywallers did their job. They got done. So the origin story of why we even decided to open a spot downtown was we needed a warehouse. We needed something to essentially get rid of the excise tax that we were paying at Bardstown
Mhm.
Bourbon Company. For anybody that doesn't know, excise taxes, the taxes you pay when your whiskey or your alcohol releases from bond, and you have to pay the federal government
Mhm.
taxes on it. And it's, if you were a T-shirt manufacturer and they said, you know what, just because you make T-shirts, we are going to charge you, um, you know, 30 cents for every T-shirt that you produce.
Mhm.
Why? No reason why. It's just going to go help fund everything. And so it's a sin tax. It's whatever it is.
Mhm.
You can't really get away from it. But what we were paying at Bardstown and versus having our own location, we were going to reduce our cost about 80%.
Mhm.
And so by getting our own location, that meant finding a warehouse, finding a way to kind of have back end operations. And I just knew we needed to have something. I found a spot on River Road, which actually now is going to be occupied by Bro Brothers Distilling. But I
Okay.
ended up finding this spot, and I was going to call the realtor. And I always say, and it's no no ill feelings towards realtors or anything like that. But as soon as you cold call a realtor, then they're going to be on your ass for the next couple months, going, "Hey,
Mhm.
I found this property. Can I help you here?" And blah blah blah. They're always looking for their commission. And needless to say, that's how they make their money. So that's fine. But I asked Ryan, I go, do you know anybody in commercial real estate that we could talk to before I make a phone call to some random realtor?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, sure, let me go ahead and make a phone call. Ends up talking to somebody and he says, hey, I actually just closed on a property. Might be perfect for you all. Why don't you come and check it out? So Ryan and I, we hop in our truck and try to say, hop in his truck and we go downtown to the Whiskey Row in Louisville and start walking through this building. And I'm going through and I'm just like, well, it's an old rundown restaurant called Boomer's Canteen. It's got carpet on the floors and 2 microwaves in the back. It was not the greatest restaurant, but it was kind of a staple down there for people who like to get sandwiches for lunch. And I'm going through, I'm going, this seems like a really expensive warehouse. I don't understand why we'd be doing these things. And the guy who's the commercial real estate owner said, you don't see the broader picture. Like, this is the gift shop. This is your bar. This is this, and this is this. And I'm going, I have no intention to ever want to deal with the general public. I just want to put my whiskey on the shelf, have it sell, and, don't have to think about it. I'm very fortunate that it happened. And because, at first our whiskey was selling without us having to do with anything, but it's like anything else. It's like you have your neophytes that get to it and then the rest of the world doesn't know about it. And so you kind of hit this stall. And we knew that we weren't always going to be able to rely on the podcast to sell it all. And we had to do something in regards to marketing. But I just said, I don't know what we could really sell out of a gift shop. And we started talking to Old Forester and Peerless and Evan Williams Bourbon Experience and trying to get a little bit of context about, like, what are you usually selling? And, they said on average, it's like 300 cases a month is what we sell out of the gift shop. We looked at it and we go, well, that's more than we sell in the entire state of Georgia in a year. So we have no option but to do this. And so that's really what we're targeting. By being able to do that, it really becomes a brand home. We're going to be right there next to Bardstown Bourbon Company, sandwiched in between them and Green River, catty corner to Michter's. And I have a feeling that it's just going to take the brand to a whole new level. People that have never heard of it or recognized it or anything, they have an opportunity to go and find a connection with it. And it's going to help serve, that purpose of sort of really boosting the brand by being here and having a physical place right there in the thick of it that people can finally discover who we are. 2, it's going to help us reduce the need to leverage distribution channels, because I'm sure that if you've listened to podcasts and you've listened to other people complain about the 3-tier system, it's not all fun and rainbows and it's not all jolly, and it's the hardest thing that we've ever done. And so if we can rely less on 3-tier distribution, that allows us to really, well, A, it keeps more money in our pocket, but B, it gives us way more resources that we don't have to hire additional salespeople. We don't have to deal with the phone calls and the trauma that all has to go into it. And we don't have to travel to every single market to go and sign bottles and, hang out in liquor stores and have to talk to liquor store owners and have them complain that, our bottles $60, but Eagle Rare 10 years, $40. And why would they sell ours versus Eagle Rare? And it's just like, I'm keep spinning my head. I'm like, I can give you answers, but I don't think you want to hear them. So it's going to help alleviate a lot of stress on the long term, but we're super excited to build this spot on Whiskey Row. I think it's just going to, again, put the brand in a whole new perspective and hopefully really kind of push it to the next level.
And yeah, I mean, you're not going to make the store owner happy unless you say, okay, yeah, we'll just cut our price to $40, because that's ultimately he's looking for a lower price to sell. He wants to move volume, and that's sort of the name of the game at this point, right? The whiskey nerds are only going to take you so far. The people like me that will show up and buy it, there's only a finite number of us. And at least from what I've talked to, I've done about 100-ish interviews. And of those 100 interviews, I've only found one person who ever said that they like the 3-tier system. But being able to have access to foot traffic consumers is pretty significant, especially sandwiching between, 2 companies like Bardstown Bourbon Company and Green River, being downtown. All indications, at least from whatever I've heard and read and seen, is that while, the whiskey market may be slowing down, it's not, it's not dying. It's just slowing down to maybe what a normal curve would be, because we have this really, really anomalous set of years around COVID where everybody was buying way more alcohol than they've ever bought in the past. But whiskey tourism and tourism related is staying the same, if not growing, right? And so having a physical location where people can show up instead of having effectively a Sam's Club of whiskey where people come in and pull it off the shelf and don't really talk to anybody. You're looking for experiences. And I would have never guessed that it was 300 cases a month, right? That's a new piece of information to me that these places are moving that volume. But I guess it makes sense. I mean, if I kind of look at it, but you know, as you think about making a pivot from acquired barrels to your new make, right? You're making this transition. Um, there's always going to be the question of what does flavor or flavor drift look like, or does it change, or is it because you're producing, your new make is coming from the same place you bought the barrels from before? Does it stay the same? Like what's the preparation plan for any type of flavor profile change?
Yeah, we just throw it in double oak and then people love it. I think that's the that's the easy one. No, that's the cheat code. I'll put it that
Mhm,
way. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, we're prepared for it. We know that this is part of it.
mhm,
And to be fair, we have made conscious decisions to change a lot of stuff too during this process. What we've learned, what we found, what we've tried,
mhm,
because even though we knew the products that we had purchased initially going into the blend. Some of those were different cooperages. Some of those were different things than what we were even accustomed to. We started putting down new make. We're like, oh, well, what wasn't that? Well, okay, we need to get this. We need to do this. And we had made decisions a couple of years ago after hanging out with Andrew Webrink, Independence Dave, and moving a lot of stuff to 18-month air dried seasoned staves instead of their typical 3 to 6 month. And that's because we had a good opportunity to actually go and taste it and trial it and said, okay, I think it's knowing that we are not going to be the company that is going to have the ability to sell 10-year-old whiskey every single day.
mhm,
We have to make a really, really damn good product between 4 and 6 years. Like that's the only way we're going to survive. We can't wait 5 more years of just taking on debt and waiting just to, have an age statement on the bottle that people are going to be like, oh wow, there we go. This is what I'm waiting for. But instead, we have to we have to kind of find um, those small bits and pieces that we've learned through the podcast of finding the right people to know. All right, if we are going to take this particular whiskey, put it in this type of barrel, what sort of changes are we going to see at certain times? And that's
mhm,
why we have gone back to using Kelvin in a few different places. That's why we have made investments to use that 18-month from ISC in different char 1, char 2, char 3, char 4 barrels. And we had a lot of ideas of just experimentation, and because we were putting down so much whiskey at, say, Bardstown Bourbon Company. I thought, and I said, there's going to be other things that we want to do down the road. People are going to want to taste the difference between the same exact whiskey aged in the same exact warehouse, but it was different char levels. And let's
mhm,
let's experiment. Let's talk about this, and let's build this into our profile, because I hope we don't mess up, but that's typically like what could possibly happen, because you always hear about char 3 and char 4 being the ones that everybody goes and buys and just does because that's just the industry norm, it's the industry standard. But when we started hearing that char 1 actually creates a better profile at a younger age, well, we made another conscious decision to say we're going to switch about 40% of our production over to char 1, just because we know that we don't have the luxury of waiting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years. Let's go ahead and let's see if we can sort of hyper scale this at, say a 4 year. If we can make a really damn good product at 4 year, our United product is not age stated, and it's not to say that nobody really wants to see a 4 year age statement of product. Let's be
mhm,
honest with you, but it's all between 4 to now getting 7 years up into there. But by being able to have a spice cabinet of stuff to play with, we know that it's going to be different. We can't keep consistency going through, but it'll be as close as we can possibly get it. And that's the reason why I started doing batch codes on the side of the labels, just because we know a lot of whiskey geeks, they want to see exactly, is this different than this one, and so on and so forth.
mhm,
And if you're going to have two different bottles, we wanted to try to get as close as we possibly can. We just know that we do not have the scale, and we don't have the inventory to be able to make sure that we can make it as consistent every single
mhm,
time. So by batch coding it up, we know that we're going to have some that are just going to have different flavor characteristics. And it's not to say that we do that on purpose. It's just because that's the hand and the cards that we're dealt, and we want to try to make the best of it.
Mhm. And I think, that can become the answer to the liquor store owner who says, why should I sell this $60 bottle when Eagle Rare is $40? Well, Eagle Rare's flavor profile stays really consistent, and it's easy to do when you're throwing, 3, 4, 500, 600 barrels into a blend and kind of seeing what comes out the other end. But I think at least in the whiskey marketplace, we come out of the other end of this sort of land grab of everybody's out in the market with more educated consumers that are now approaching like a vintage concept like wine, right? Or, kind of the yearly release of this red wine from this region of California is different year over year. And now they want to buy multiples so they can do that comparison. Exactly what you were talking about. We're less concerned about consistency of flavor. We're more concerned about, is it good and what's the difference? Because you're right. No one really cares about an age statement until it gets into double digits. Anything 9 and younger. And I think we've all sort of seen that with Elijah Craig. Anything under 10 starts getting slapped around as terrible. And it's not, there's really, really quality product in that place, but the consumers don't care about it as much. But do you think that maybe from a brand perspective, because you have this really, really rich set of information that you got and are continuing to get through your podcast, that it puts you in a unique place to pivot branding, pivot styling, or whatever, based off of doing a week over week critical analysis of what's happening in the marketplace? Whereas, you have marketing teams that are doing this, but I don't think they're going nearly as deep as Bourbon Pursuit does.
No, looking back and actually, looking at this retroactively, we're probably better positioned than anybody else to enter a market and be really good at it. It's been a decade now. We've been able to have the brightest minds in the industry on the show and leeching information out of them, asking things. And when we started on brand, I felt like the show got better because we started asking harder hitting questions and actually getting into the business and economics of it. And we have probably the best R&D library that anybody else in the industry has. I mean,
Mhm.
every single distillery sends us their stuff, and we get to try everything. So we see exactly where we rank, and we'll get a bunch of the limited releases and be like, wow, this is garbage. But we see how they are marketing it. We see what they're
Mhm.
doing that is getting the consumer to not care about it whatsoever. So what can we do, knowing that I feel like our whiskey's better than this? How can we get our consumers, or how can we find these consumers to go and find and latch onto our stuff?
Mhm.
So it's very much it's a game of chess that goes on in our head all the time to see exactly what's coming in, what are they doing, how are they marketing it, who are they getting it from, what do their press releases look like, who are they working with, what's the PR company. All these different things come together to try to find this sort of holy grail of how do we win in this
Mhm.
market. And we're getting closer. I'm not going to say that we've won here yet. We still have a lot of work to do when it comes to the marketing, getting it out to broader education. We're not getting in New York Times and Wall Street Journal and all these things that are, garden and gun. We're not getting into
Mhm.
those things yet because we don't have the name recognition. So how do we build the name recognition around it? And hopefully, we're just trying to, pull different strings and seeing what unravels to see exactly what is that thing that's going to stick.
Mhm.
But I feel like we are really well positioned just because of the podcast, having all these names on the industry just come in and share their secrets. I mean, to be fair, that's what they did.
Yeah.
There's no secrets in this industry.
Mhm.
You can't copy, you can't replicate. You can copy as much as you want, but it's going to be different. It's like you make a 78 10 12 mash bill over here. They make a 78 10 12 mash bill over here. They taste completely different because
Right.
of everything that goes into it with the 90,000 steps so you get the final product. And so it really doesn't matter
Mhm.
of what happens from there. I mean, we could talk about cigar blends and how that term has just been bastardized to all hell because of, somebody that made it really good and it
Mhm.
latched on. So somebody says, well, I'll make a cigar blend, and
Right.
they'll just finish it and whatever and call it whatever because it's not trademarked and it can
Mhm.
be whatever. So everything can copycat and do whatever. But the good thing is like we can take a lot of these lessons of
Mhm.
people that just shared everything here and we can really try to transform it. And we've been leeches. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not gonna deny it. Like, it's been really kind of cool that we have this very unique perspective in the industry of having all these people come together, and that's what I think has been cool about Bourbon Pursuit is that we've kind of been a little bit of a glue. We're here today not because of me and Ryan. We're so smart and
Mhm.
we're the best things that ever happened to bourbon. No, that's not it at all. It's like we have been able to uh, help boost the industry. I felt like we've been a big advocate for it,
Mhm.
taking the stories of people that are behind these brands and sharing it to the world. We stand on the shoulders of giants at the end of the day of being able to, they really paved the path. They carved this way. We're riding coattails, whatever analogy you want to use. And we're just fortunate that we're in a position now that we get to kind of come in and play in the sandbox.
Mhm.
And we're still going to be a blip on the radar to a lot of these big guys. And I think that's fine with us. We're not trying to take over the world. We're not trying to be Jack Daniels. That's not going to happen. We just want to get a little piece of the pie. And I think there's going to be enough room for everybody when it comes to that too.
Yeah, and you know, consumers are fickle, right? They're sometimes predictable and sometimes not. And touching on the cigar blend, like, it's a marketing term that somebody developed that really latched hold. And as soon as it latches hold, then the other brands are like, okay, let's steal this concept because it is a way to make money. And so every brand's a leech. And the whiskey industry's sort of surprising, right? You've worked in the tech industry. You likely have never seen the degree of participation and communication that happens between competitors on a regular basis. At least I haven't. It's very much like let's keep our secrets to ourselves, but the product
That
itself,
or we go just acquire them. That's
right? Yeah,
how it works.
it's either acquisition or stay secret and try to burn them to the ground. Whereas in the whiskey industry, your rick house collapses and somebody else says, hey, we can help you out for a little while until you can get back on your feet. It's confusing, right? But it is the whiskey space. Kind of thinking about the pursuit line and having somewhat of a vintage approach where you've got your batches so what's happening. um, that's sort of understood with that particular label, that particular SKU. Everybody that buys it, or at least most educated consumers that buy that, know that. You guys have launched a couple of new labels in the last few months. Um, are those going to be number one, what are they? Number two, are you going to try to keep those as homogenous and neutral to their actual original state, or are those going to be a vintage concept as well?
Yeah, so we've got a few different projects that are happening. One, so the United project is actually going to be expanding a
Mhm.
little bit. I should have been smart enough and actually grabbed the bottle and brought it here on camera, but we are going through a big packaging change, and so we're excited to start rolling that out. That'll happen hopefully by the end of May. We'll see what
Mhm.
happens. Might be in early June. We'll see how far we get along. There's still a lot of other bits and pieces that have to come together. But with United, we had done everything at 108 proof, and there's a whole story behind there because we thought everything was blended perfectly at 108 proof. It tasted well, and that's really where the showcase and the whiskey really shined. But we know, and we kind of found out later on that we were really missing two big sides of the market. One is all the whiskey geeks, right? Give me cash strength or give me death.
Right.
And then two, you have the broader market that won't drink anything over 100 proof because they think it's just too hot, it's too much, and they
Mhm.
just want smooth. So we are going to be actually rebranding United, both the bourbon and the rye, to be 88 proof. And
Mhm.
then we're going to have a United 108, which is our OG version of it. And then we're also going to have United barrel proof for bourbon and rye. So I'm excited that we're going to be releasing those here in
Mhm.
the next month or two, just to make sure that we're hitting all spectrums of where we need to be. I feel like we're going to be the Weller foolproof line at some point, or
Mhm.
because you got the green, the red, the black, and blah
Yeah.
blah. So we'll see what's going to happen there. And then we, we're kind of in a cool situation because the place that we're in currently, John, you said you had come and done the whole shebang. And when you were here, you might have heard a little bit of the rumbling of the stories, and you might have seen some of the old labels that are in our hallway that are framed
Mhm.
out there. And we didn't really know when we rented out this building at 1700 Melwood that it was the former home of Melwood Distillery. And
Mhm.
as I started uncovering, and here's the weird the thing is like if we would have landed anywhere else in the vicinity of Louisville, we probably would have been on an old defunct distillery ground because
Right.
through doing a lot of this research, I found out that, prior to Prohibition, there were about 500 distilleries in Kentucky.
Mhm.
There were around 200 just in the 5th district, which
Mhm.
included Louisville, Bardstown, Oldham County, and Jefferson County, and some other ones around there too. Um, but there are about 30 to 34 that were just on Whiskey Row. So there's a lot of just distilling history that's around the city. So when I started uncovering and finding that we're on the grounds of Melwood, I just went on a deep dive and
Mhm.
just started uncovering as much information, telling the story. And I always give a shout out to Chris Haynes. He's a Patreon supporter. And as soon as he heard the story, he went even deeper and started finding a bunch of the stuff on eBay and different auction sites and whatnot, and hand delivered some of the original labels,
Mhm.
newspaper cutouts, vintage empty pint bottles and whatnot. And that really kind of said, we're in a very unique situation that we can talk about this because it's not our history, but it's becoming part of our history. Like
Right.
we're helping resurrect something on the grounds where we stood. And the one story that I love to talk about with the Melwood brand is that they were mostly a lot of brands were at the time, they were mostly contract outfits. I said 200 quote unquote distilleries in Louisville. They weren't traditional distilleries. You had some major producers, but then you had a lot of people that were rectifiers, that were blenders, there were people that
Mhm.
did that. And George Garvin Brown was one of those people. George Garvin Brown used to buy his whiskey from Melwood to be blended and bottled as different labels. And that's before they ever held and owned a distillery. They didn't actually own a distillery until after, or should I say, right before Prohibition started, because that's when the Whiskey Trust was buying up stuff and so on and so forth, and they had to make themselves able to kind of get through that hump. But the good thing about that is like that we had like uncovered bits and pieces, and we said, okay, there's story, there's history to tell. The good thing is like the artwork's already done, so we can go ahead and redo this. So that's the easy part.
Mhm.
Then it became, well, how do we keep this authentic? How do we make this? Um, I'm not going to go buy a bunch of MGP and throw it in the bottle and be like, hey, we did it, right? I said, this Melwood was the home of Bottled and Bond. It was one of the original brands. Rudolph Balke, he's the one that one of 3 people that traveled to Washington, D.C. to make sure that the Bottled and Bond Act got passed since it had been bouncing around the halls of Congress for over a year. He actually went to Washington, D.C. and make sure that got passed. He's a big proponent of it. And the Melwood line was all Bottled and Bond. And so I said, well, we've got to do a Bottled and Bond product. And it's got to be Kentucky. Like there's
Mhm.
no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And everything that came out of here was all Kentucky. And so I want to continue to see everything be a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey or Kentucky straight rye whiskey coming out of this particular line. And so we were able to, and that's the great thing. Maybe it's the bad thing and the good thing about this right now is like, even though that barrel prices are going down, but it opens up a whole catalog of stuff that we want to
Mhm.
find interesting that we can come in the door and we can put them underneath this line. And that's really what the Melwood Legacy Collection is about is not only do we get a chance to kind of talk about history, but we can find interesting and unique barrels that become available, and we can put them in these sort of one-off things. And so our first 2 releases is that we had the Melwood Bottled and Bond, which is a 6-year-old product that
Mhm.
we put out. And then we have Derbytown, which is a 7-year-old cask strength Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, and that is part of our 78-10-12 mash bill that we use from Bardstown.
Mhm.
So it's using products that we already have in part of this, and so we're finding unique ways to kind of use our existing stocks to help put it into kind of like unique and fun packaging, and it back into doing everything with intent. I didn't wanna do what a lot of other people do and just there's nothing wrong with it. It's the easy way to do it. It's like there's a lot of just standard glass out there, and you can put it into a wine bottle, and you can put a cheap cork on it and whatever, and I said, "Let's be very intentional of the packaging because when you have it on your shelf, yeah, the whiskey's gonna be good, but I really want the packaging to stand out." And so we wanted to really mimic a lot of the pre-prohibition style pint flasks, and
Mhm.
that's really what we did. So it has this it's a modern aesthetic to it, but it still has this vintagey fun vibe to it.
And it, it's interesting to see the resurgence of some of these older brands, and I think you're right. The barrel prices are going down, so it's going to enable a lot of folks that are already in the space to maybe find some unique ways to bring what I imagine over the next 5 years are going to be some more aged whiskeys, right? Because there's a whole bunch of 4 to 6 year stuff that started getting laid down as we were kind of on the way up, and maybe the appetite for buying those is lower than it was 2 years ago. And so they're either going to get sold at 4 to 6, or they're going to age to 6 to 10 to 12 to whatever, happens, so it puts you guys at a unique advantage there. I know you're probably in a position where you really wish the build out was done prior to Derby weekend, because having
Oh
a
God,
label of,
don't get me started.
yeah.
It's trauma every single week. Yeah, I was actually going through an email thread
Mhm.
about a week ago, and we were talking about having soft openings in February, ready to go in March, and now here we are. We're ready to go, and we're going into May, and still not anywhere close to being open.
And that's a lot of what construction is. It's hurry up and wait, right? Because you've got the drywallers came, right, but now it's the painters, and are the painters going to be able to squeeze in between another job that they've already bid out, whatever, and then the final inspection, the electrician, the finish electrician, not the rough one, but the finish electrician comes after that to make sure that it's a whole process, and I get that. And you said you're about 30 days out, and it sounds like you might sneak into being ready for Bourbon Week, and was it National Bourbon Week that happens, that they're kind of setting up in downtown. And I'm asking that just with the intent of, if you guys make that, are you going to try to set up maybe some special events during that time frame? Obviously you're going to do a grand opening, but you've got Melwood, you've got Derbytown, you've got Pursuit, you've got a whole lot of things that are happening. You're changing your bottling a little bit, which, if you had a fully automated bottling line, would be a nightmare and a cost. But I don't think you guys are fully automated yet, so you don't
No,
have to
not
worry
close.
about
Not
that.
even close.
But do you guys envision doing any, like, if you do make National Bourbon Week, do you envision doing anything that week that's special, or are you just saying, hey, we're grand opening and that is it?
We're just kind of focused on getting opening right now. And,
Mhm.
and to be fair, we are trying to make sure that we hit our deadline of Pursuit Palooza. So this is an
Mhm.
event that we throw every single year as kind of a nod and a thank you to our Patreon
Mhm.
fans that help support the podcast, because we couldn't do the podcast without, we know that have that recurring revenue that happens to that platform. And so this is an event that we hold. This will be our third annual, maybe fourth. I can't remember,
Mhm.
but this will be it's an event that I'll call in favors to a lot of distilleries and say, hey, what can
Mhm.
we do? I'm going to bring in 100 bourbon nerds from around the country and just want to show them something that's not going to be an off the shelf tour that we can do. What can we do for them?
Mhm.
And a lot of people this is kind of, it's gotten to the point where this year we're doing stuff at Angel's Envy, and most people were going, Angel's Envy, like, why would you do it at Angel's Envy? And I felt that, what Owen Wilson is, or sorry, not Owen Martin is doing over at Angel's Envy, he's really kind of bringing a new resurgence
Mhm.
of not just another port finish whiskey, but he's doing a lot of stuff in the bourbon side. And I said, this is a good opportunity to kind of really showcase stuff. And so when I just told Angel's Envy, I said, hey, I'd love to have Palooza and do something. And they said, love it. Well, we're not going to charge you anything. Let's
Mhm.
just go ahead and we'll figure this out. We're going to roll out the red carpet.
Mhm.
But by doing that, they see the value of being able to take, somebody that might have written off Angel's Envy for a very long time and turning them around and making them fans
Mhm.
once again. And getting the opportunity to go and talk to my buddy Josh, who's GM over at Heaven Hill, and being one of the first people that get to go and see the new Heaven Hill Springs distillery. And so we're really just trying to be open for that, because we have a lot of stuff
Mhm.
that we have centered around Pursuit, not to mention the 18 Airbnbs above us that people already have rented out. So we got to make sure that those are done, and they have working AC units and everything like
Mhm.
that too. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we prepared just for that. And so really that's the North Star right now, is
Mhm.
making sure that we are open and ready to go. And that's the second week of June. So that is
Oh, wow.
it's an aggressive date right now. And so we're on all cylinders trying to make it happen.
Yeah, I imagine there's probably daily check-ins to see how close you are, right? Like, it's like launching any new software product. You're gonna, when you get to the last few weeks, it gets real
Get your
real
red light,
hectic.
green lights, stand ups, all that sort of stuff. Yep. Where
Yeah,
are
yeah.
risks?
I had a little bit of a heart palpitation at the red light green light conversation. Um, and it's interesting to hear you mention Angels Envy, because I usually see things a number of different ways, right? So you've got a brand like Angels Envy, and they've been sort of quiet, not like off the shelf, but sort of quiet in what they're doing. And that usually, to me, indicates a handful of things. They're either on their way out, they're about to be acquired, or they're preparing for kind of the next big thing. Usually, when brands that are of that repute kind of get quiet, they're figuring out what the next step is. And I had already thought that was kind of the direction, but it makes sense, right? So they're trying to build a few things up for kind of the next stage of what they're doing, and that's the kind of stuff that you get from being a part of a podcast. And you mentioned your Patreon community, and this is more of a just an intellectual curiosity for me, but the whiskey market, is settling down. Are you seeing a similar trend within Patreon communities where those things are starting to slow down as well, or are they just staying, pretty level for you?
I mean, we've seen a steady decline for
Mm-hmm.
sure, and that's not because of it's I'd say it's for one reason on why we see it. I mean, sure, people are going to pull back because they see it as unnecessary spending.
Mm-hmm.
We always like to say that, I hope you're joining us for the content, that we produce a free show, and it's not like brands are reaching out to us and want to throw us money because
Mm-hmm.
they have a ton of marketing spend on advertising. Like, that's not happening. Sometimes they'd rather still go buy a billboard, and that's
Mm-hmm.
fine, whatever. But we had started doing the barrel picks as a part of Bourbon Pursuit. We were one of the people that initially championed this thing in regards of creating a Patreon group that really is focused around barrel picks. We were one of the initial ones that do it. Like, we cut our teeth. We set the standard on what it was like to find a retailer, to take care of shipping, to make sure that everything's on the up and up when it comes to compliance. And it was very, very difficult. And we shared a lot
Mm-hmm.
of our lessons with other people who still do it to this day, and they do it almost better than we did, to be fair. It's like the Bourbon Junkies and Bruzel, they do a fantastic job in what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
But we had done, at the height of COVID, we were doing, I think, 45 barrels, something like that, a year. And it just got to the point where we just completely saturated what was going on. And I mean, we were picking barrels from absolutely everywhere, and they were selling out without a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point it became a problem, and we were sticking our retailer with a bunch of excess inventory and trying to figure out how to get rid of this. But it was kind of a good wake up call for us too, because we knew that was not the long term plan for us.
Yep.
We never made a dime off the barrel picks. Like, that was never an incentive for us. We always told our retail partner, I go, hey, you give us the allocation, I'll bring you the customers. All I care is if I can get more customers through Patreon, and I don't need to take some off the top for a barrel pick. That's not what I need money for. That's too much exchanging of hands, and then you get to raise the price to be able to make your margin, and people are unhappy because they're paying, $70 for 94 proof Elijah Craig pick, and they don't want to do
Mm-hmm.
that. So I said, let's just try to be aggressive with the price as possible, and we'll worry about the membership. Like, that's where it is.
Mm-hmm.
But after the saturation, after that happened, we also kind of looked at the direction of the company and the businesses, and we knew that while the podcast is great, it makes good revenue. It's not enough revenue that offsets a tech career, or offsets, I don't know, maybe being a manager at McDonald's. Like, maybe it would offset, maybe close to there, but not to where the life that we're
Mm-hmm.
accustomed to. So we knew that the bourbon brand had the long-term sticking point, and that's where the investments are coming in, where we truly do get to have a better salary and career and everything. And so we pulled the plug on it pretty hard of doing barrel picks. Now we may do 2 to 3 a year,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. And so we pulled back hard. And by doing that, yeah, we lost a lot of people on Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably about um, maybe 35 to 40% less than where we were at the height of it. But that's fine, because I know that the people that are still there, that are
Mm-hmm.
supporting us on Patreon, they're doing it for the right reasons. They're not doing it because they want extra stuff out of it. They're doing it because they love the content. They do it because they know the muscle and the grit and the time, the sweat and the tears that all go into building this content that they get for free. And they're a very, very, very small portion of people that help pay and help support the content. And I always
Mm-hmm.
tell people, and we say it on the podcast all the time, it's like, we could not do the podcast without our Patreon community. It just would not happen. And so I'm very thankful for all of them that donate their, their hard-earned dollars, even down to $5 a month. I mean, it truly means a lot by being able to have that be the, the rocket fuel that we need to help not only keep the podcast going, but it is a part that is kind of building into the marketing engine of Pursuit Spirits. So would one exist without the other? I don't know. We'll see. Time will tell when it comes for that.
Yeah, and it sounds like you probably learned a lesson that most brands just inherently knew that were already making whiskey, is that you don't really make any money off single barrels, right? They're a thing, they're a marketing arm, they're a whatever else. But and it got real hectic because I was a barrel pick member for a while from you guys, and the pricing was always reasonable and it was always great. But then you end up with 300 bottles of single barrel picks, right? And
I
now
know how
you're
it
kind of
goes.
overwhelmed, and then you see the 10 or 12 channels, whether they be podcasts or YouTube channels or social media groups that are doing picks. They're all dropping the exact same brands at the exact same time, and you're having to kind of play the game in between those things. And you guys shifted into, okay, yep, that's a thing that still happens, but we're really focusing on our own brand, our own marketing, our own, kind of whatever. um, and we're pushing up on time, so I want to be aware of that. But if you think about, the podcast is kind of what put you where you are, right? If you think back on the journey as a podcast host, was there a particular moment where you kind of put in your brain as a milestone of, it's, industry recognition, it's a particular guest, it's a shipment from a marketing company that came to you and you said, we're here, we are actually, actively a member of this? Because anybody who does a podcast, they sort of have a time whenever that maybe that happens, or they haven't had it yet. Kind of what was yours?
That's a good question, because now that we're on the supplier side, I know we get people all the time. They're like, "Hey, I run this YouTube channel. You should send me samples." And I go, I never once, as we were building Bourbon Pursuit, asked for handouts. It
Mm-hmm.
was eventually when I got my first bottle in the mail, and I can't remember even what it was from anymore, but um, maybe that was a sign of like, hey, we did something. I mean, I remember our first advertising dollar didn't come in until a year after we started.
Mm-hmm.
We it was a lot of trial and error and figuring things out and whatnot. I would say the moment where it felt like we truly became something that is a force to be reckoned with is probably when Fred Minnick joined the show.
Mm-hmm.
It's we always talk to Fred, and Fred is, people love him and hate him, and I think people just love to hate him for various reasons because he's good at what he does, and he's
Mm-hmm.
just, but there's no BS about him. He tells it like it is. He's a stand-up guy. He's a veteran. I will back him up,
Mm-hmm.
anytime somebody says something negative, and I'm always on his side. So when he joined, we always told him, because we always said, we are at the top of our game when it came to Bourbon Pursuit, and we said, if anybody could take us down, it would be you, Fred. If you started your own bourbon podcast, you're the only person that could take us down. And he was told by a lot of his PR company, they said, you need to go start a podcast. This is something you
Mm-hmm.
need to do. And you know, I'm glad that we had established a friendship, but we also established a lot of the sort of like the core of what Bourbon Pursuit is and what we were doing and the technology and the release schedule and all these things that Fred just can't do on his own. And when he approached us, he said, I'd rather join you all than
Mm-hmm.
rather compete against you. And that was kind of like a really good moment, because we felt really confident about sort of like where the show was going,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of how it was going to be able to kind of transform from that. Um, Now we are here a couple years later. Fred does have his own show, the Fred Minnick Show, the Fred Minnick
Right.
Podcast, and so on and so forth. But he takes a different approach.
Mm-hmm.
He's bringing on celebrities, and we've had our hand at having celebrities on the show, which is fine. It's great, but for us as a part of Bourbon Pursuit, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really move the needle. We're not bringing in Brad Paisley fans to start listening to Bourbon Pursuit. That's not happening. But
Right.
you can have Bourbon Pursuit fans listen to what Brad Paisley's doing with the world of bourbon, and it doesn't like help jump it anywhere. And I'm sort of glad that he takes that approach and we don't, because if you've ever had to deal with having any sort of even B-list celebrity on the show, it's like pulling teeth when it comes to scheduling. And you're just going like, I'm not going to bend over backwards because,
Right.
you can't make it today and you want to reschedule for next week. Like, I got shit to do too. So I whenever we get something for celebrities, I'm kind of like, nah, I really don't care. I don't think my audience cares either. It's just,
Mhm.
sure, sometimes it's fun. I loved having Jim Gaffigan on. That was kind of like a surreal moment for us.
Mhm.
But other than that, we don't chase after celebrities. We're not in that realm. So I think that was really kind of a cool moment when Fred joined. And the other, I'll throw one more out, is because we knew that what we were doing wasn't sustainable. We had been doing it for a couple years. There was no ROI. The money wasn't rolling. Yeah, I said, we made our first dollar after a year,
Mhm.
but when you spend an extra 20 hours a week, trying to build this thing, because nobody realizes, John, what me and you are doing right now, this is the easy part, right? Sitting around talking, just having a
Mhm.
good time. But when it comes to the scheduling, the post production, the marketing, and worrying about scheduling your next guest, it's the hamster wheel that never ends. We realize, like, we're spending an extra 20 hours a week on this BS and making $300 a month on some advertising from the Kentucky Bourbon Festival or the KDA just wasn't worth it. And that's when we put it out there on Twitter. And I kind of put it out there and I said, I don't know how much longer this can go on. We're going to give it a couple more months and whatnot. Mark Gillespie from Whiskey Castle, I'll give him the tip of the hat because he's a OG in this world, and said, you guys are doing great. Keep it up. And somebody also responded back and said, you should start a Patreon. And
Mhm.
we started a Patreon, and first month, $100, and second month, a couple hundred more dollars, and started Barrel Picking Club, and kind of took off from there. And now it's, doing, $7,500 a month at this current moment for annual recurring revenue. I'm not one of those creators that I hide behind it and have it hidden. I'm all about transparency. So you want to see how well Bourbon Pursuit's doing, you can go see it right there. But I'm excited to be able to, say, like, I think those are two pivotal moments where the podcast really took a turn and kind of set it up for where we are today. And it's crazy to think that we've been doing this now for a decade, and hopefully maybe we have a decade more left into us, and we'll
Mhm.
see. At some point, there has to be an exit for Bourbon Pursuit, and I want to hand it down to the next generation, or whoever else can sort of take the reins with it and run. And I want to set up the framework that they can be successful with it too.
Yeah, and it's a testament to the thing you've achieved whenever you have something to hand off, because you know eh, intentionally so. There's a lot of us that are kind of on the smaller end of the spectrum that have intentionally stayed small because at the end of the day, I have a job and I have kids and I have other things. This is a fun hobby, and I really enjoy having the conversations and kind of being a tertiary part of a community. But kind of nailing down Fred Minnick as a part of your show is a monumental thing, right? If you look at the history of it, and from what I've come across, because I've not met him directly, but I've met a lot of people that are friends with him, and everybody who knows him personally loves Fred. Like they say he's a great guy. There's not the same thing, and it's almost like there's this love to hate. People are people, right? And maybe it's like a wrestling persona more than anything else, where they watch the video version of Fred Minnick, but that's not the human version of Fred Minnick. Those are all slightly different. But kind of thinking about the success metric for the podcast, and this will be the last question, I promise. um the last time that I had heard the number, right, the debt line for what you guys were doing was 7 million. Now it's 9 million. Do you have kind of a success metric that's kind of the equivalent of when Fred Minnick joined the podcast, this is when we knew we were okay? Do you have that success metric for the brand, for the product line?
Well, we haven't met it yet. I can tell you that. We're getting closer. I would say once we start decreasing that red and getting closer to black,
Mhm.
is when we can start doing that. We have, through the spreadsheets, we have this goal that the company should be able to be debt free and bankroll itself by 2032. And
Mhm.
if we can make that happen, then that's great. I'm a bad business person when it comes to this, because everybody says that you should always have debt. You should have good debt and debt that you can work on. And probably listened to way too much Dave Ramsey when I was like graduating college and saying like, you should live debt free. You shouldn't have
Mhm.
any debt on your books. And I pay off my credit card probably every 3 days, right? And
Mhm.
that's just like the nature of who I am. And so I want to get out of this hole as fast as I possibly can. And so for me, I kind of look at it almost like a financial aspect. But that financial aspect doesn't come in play until we get to the point where we just can't keep the whiskey on the shelves anymore. Like if
Mhm.
if it goes absolutely bananas and people are chasing after it like they chase after a lot of stuff in the Sazerac portfolio, that'd be awesome. Is that going to happen? Probably not. It's going to be an ever going marketing and just continually evolving ourselves and creating new products and having to bring new things out to market. Like you just, it would be so awesome. I mean, you work in software, so it's the constant changing landscape. But you can't sit content.
Mhm.
And I was talking to somebody yesterday, and we talked about one of a heritage brand and how they said every 5 to 6 years you have to come out with new packaging because that's just what consumers expect. They need to have
Mhm.
something new. You can't just set it and forget it in this industry. And I was really hoping we can get rid of that because in my tech career, all I was doing was chasing the next thing that had to be developed and how you build
Mhm.
and run infrastructure for data centers. And it's just like it never stops. And now I was hoping I was like, oh, cool, it's whiskey. It's like
Mhm.
accounting, right? There's just numbers. They don't change. And now here we are. Well, I guess we got to keep changing.
Yeah, that's the changes is ever growing, and it looks like, right. So the timeline you kind of toss out here looks like you have 7 years to build the debt to its peak, and then 7 years to get rid of it, right? Because you now we have 14-year cycle, which is really audacious, and I suspect, given the success that I've seen, at least from the whiskey nerds, feels like reasonable, right? It doesn't feel like a really unreasonable thing to put yourself there. And I assume you've done the math on this. Like this is your livelihood at this point. This is your legacy. I do want to say thank you, Kenny, for hopping on. I know your time is very valuable, and time's the only thing we can't make more of. You can make more whiskey, you can make more dollars. You can't make more time. So thanks for hopping on and having the conversation with me about it. Just kind of as a note here, I think I got through 4 of the 21 questions that I wrote, and the rest
Oh,
of them were
wow.
just part of the
Really?
conversation. So thank you so much. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming this on, and leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using EmbellishPod, and you can give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, contact details, and more. Thanks for stopping by.